Today we are going to be unboxing and reviewing and swatching and even doing a little painting of the Wallace Seymour oil paint. Okay, so first up I have a non-toxic version of Flake White. It replaces lead white in my palette, though I've never actually used lead white, so I'm not sure I can say replace, but you get the idea. I just seem to have a particular skill in getting paint all over myself somehow, so I've chosen to go with a non-toxic version of lead white. And this swatch is actually painted on, so that's an accurate color representation. It looks beautiful. I got the big size of the non-toxic Flake White because I'm pretty confident I'm going to love it. And then I also bought some other colors because why not? I'm already paying shipping. So let's see what's in here. I honestly can't even remember what I ordered. I know it took me a while to narrow down the colors to these four though. Oh yes, this first one is the Ingleton Green Earth, and it's their own hand-dug production, which is pretty cool. And that's a big reason why I wanted to get this color in the first place. I wanted a color that was exclusive to Wallace Seymour, one I wouldn't be able to get anywhere else. It looks just beautiful. You can even see the earthy texture in the paint swatch. Okay, next one. I'm pretty sure this next one is Backbarrow Blue from the looks of it. Let's unwrap and see. Yes, it is. Okay, wow. How beautiful does that blue look? My goodness. This is also known as Dolly Blue, which is such a fun name. I think this color is like a perfect blend of brightness and depth. I'm really excited to see this in a painting. And last but never least, let's unwrap the final two. I only bought 4 paints, but 4 was enough for my pocketbook. So this one here is Lowry White. I'm trying out different whites because I feel like they can really change the color of your piece, especially when you're mixing the white with other colors. This white is a little bit more on the gray side than other whites that I've used. And you can see it even here compared to the Flake White, it has a slightly different tone. So I'm excited to kind of see how these two play out. The Lowry White is based off of a color used by the painter L.S. Lowry. Also, can I just say that's a really hard name to pronounce, Lowry? Anyway, so those are the 3 small tubes that I got. And of course, along with my chunky non-toxic Flake White, rounds out my new Wallace Seymour collection. So now that we have all the beautiful colors laid out, let's move on to some proper swatching to really understand what these paints can do. I'm going to show the color straight from the tube and then with a bit of my chalk medium added. So I also wanted this video to be more than just an unboxing. While we play around with these Wallace Seymour paints, I thought I would chat about some of the parts of the artistic journey I've been thinking about lately. Like doing preliminary studies and how I balance technical skill development and personal expression, and finally diving into the sometimes fraught world of critiquing your own work. So first up, I'm mixing a little bit of my chalk medium, which I use in every oil painting session. It's just a mix of marble dust and linseed oil. I'll go more in depth on my medium in a future video, but I generally aim for a 2-to-1 ratio of marble dust to oil. So I just mix that up really well using a little wooden stick, and sometimes I have to add a little bit more oil if I didn't get the ratio right the first time. I usually just kind of stick it on my palette so I have it ready to go whenever I need to mix it into my colors. Now about swatching in general. It might seem simple or even tedious at times, but it's a great first step to understand how the paints behave. I didn't always swatch my paints, but the more I do, the more I love it. And the more I learn, honestly. You're kind of learning the paint's personality, how it spreads, the transparency, how intense the pigment is, how it reacts to your medium, and how it mixes with other colors. All of this knowledge will help me when I use them in my paintings. Plus, it's just a nice, chill activity to do sometimes, so I encourage you to make time for it. So first, I'm just going to put all 4 colors on my paint palette. I put them along the edge so I have room for color mixing later. I currently use disposable palette paper. In future, I'd really like to try either a wood or glass palette, but I got this paper right when I started painting, so I'm going to use it all up until I don't have it anymore. A little glimpse at the Backbarrow Blue before it goes on the palette. So once all 4 colors are on there, I can see and feel right away some differences between the paints. The non-toxic Flake White feels a bit stiffer maybe, a bit more ropey, which I mean is the goal. The Lowry White is a little bit more creamy and smoother than the Flake White, I would say. And then here's a little close-up of the Lowry White on the palette knife, just to give you a better sense. The Ingleton Green Earth is definitely more oily than I expected, to be honest. It's almost soupy. It's a really nice color though. I'm not entirely sure what to think of this one, to be honest. It's not what I expected. Maybe if I add a bit more, well, no, more oil is coming out. Let's try mixing that together. There's a close-up of the Ingleton Green Earth. Okay, let's go to the Backbarrow Blue. This one's quite smooth, very creamy. It mixes really well on the palette knife. Gotta get a little close-up of that one too. So there's the 4 colors on the palette. Okay, so as I mentioned, this Flake White non-toxic was my primary reason for even trying the Wallace Seymour paints. I had read a couple reviews by other artists that said it quite closely mimicked the handling qualities of the original lead white, which is supposed to be more ropey with a gentler tinting strength. Well, I've never used lead white myself. A lot of artists I know love it, so I definitely wanted to find a close alternative for my palette. And here I'm adding a little bit of chalk medium, and it did make the paint a bit creamier and easier to spread. From what I found in my research, the pigment is pure, a special grade of zirconium oxide. It's semi-opaque and should dry about medium fast. So while I can't say for sure how this non-toxic version compares to the real deal, I can say I really enjoy how this paint behaves so far. Next up, let's talk more about the Lowry White. This white is quite nice. I like it a lot more than I expected. I didn't really have any preconceived notions necessarily, but it almost feels soft. The tube details say it's made up of 3 pigments: titanium white modified, and Mars black or synthetic iron oxide black. I think it would be a really lovely paint to use when creating like an atmospheric work with maybe some mist or some really soft skies, or maybe even a portrait, though I haven't done a lot of portraits in oils yet, so I can't say for sure on that one. There's actually quite a bit of difference between these two. Flake White is quite a bit warmer than the Lowry White, which is more gray, I would say. So now on to the Ingleton Green Earth. Oh, it's very, very oily. I'm not entirely sure if it's supposed to be like that. I wonder if the pigment and binder has separated in the tube a bit over time. It's quite transparent, which the tube does say it's a semi-transparent paint. I'm going to add a bit of marble dust directly to the paint and see if that helps. Though adding the marble dust will make it even more transparent. I think this paint could be really nice for glazing or layering or really subtle color shifts maybe. On the more color technical side, an area I'm also trying to improve in, this color is a 10Y on the Munsell color scale, which means it's more yellow-green, and its value is an 8 out of 10, which means that it's quite light value-wise. And the chroma is a 2, which, if you are wondering what that means, it means the saturation is lower, so the color is more muted rather than bright. It seems a little easier to work with when I add the marble dust. I'm more used to painting with opaque or semi-opaque paint, so this one might stretch my skills a bit, which is always good. I wonder if I set the paint up right for a bit, if the oil will settle more towards the bottom. Let us see. I shall leave it there for now. And finally, the Backbarrow Blue. This was purely a fun purchase because I just love blues of all sorts. It's also a semi-transparent paint, though honestly, it doesn't feel as transparent as the Ingleton Green Earth. Oh, that's just so pretty. Look at that. The pigment is PB29, which is an ultramarine blue. And since it's a pure pigment, meaning it only has the one pigment in it, it would be great for color mixing. So you don't have any hidden colors potentially muddying up your mixtures. The paint is already pretty smooth, so I don't notice a huge difference adding in my medium. It maybe feels a bit more fluid. The pigment has a Munsell hue of 7.5 PB, which means it a pure blue that leans towards violet. Value is decently dark at 3, but the chroma wasn't available on the tube, so it seems pretty saturated to me though. A bit about the Wallace Seymour paints overall. They are handmade oil colors, with each color batch made in small quantities. I think that's really neat because it kind of means that each batch is almost like this little one-of-a-kind collection. The Wallace Seymour website notes that all colors are made without drying agents and are prepared with English cold-pressed linseed oil from a single estate farm. So pretty high quality paints it seems. Wallace Seymour actually only offers artist grade paints, and it sounds like their goal is to offer high quality paints to all artists, whether beginning or advanced, for a reasonable price. I can get behind that goal. I also like that they have their own exclusive lines, like the Ingleton Green Earth I bought is from their Native Earth line, and the paints from this line are all hand dug out of the ground before being processed. I'm in Canada, so the Wallace Seymour paints were a bit harder for me to get a hold of. I purchased mine from Select Fine Art Materials, which is based out of Ottawa. I'll leave a link to the website in the description if you are also in Canada and are interested in trying out the Wallace Seymour paints too. So there's the 4 colors I bought all swatched out. You can see up close the different textures of each paint. I am really happy with my selection. I think these will be a great addition to my color palettes. Now let's move on to a little study. As I set up for this painting study, let's talk about the role studies like these play in my artistic process. I do them about 50% of the time right now. Too often I would skip this exploration phase, just kind of wanting to get to the real painting. But I'm finding more and more that studies really help me hone my skills and also better understand my materials. I'm using an acrylic primed canvas sheet, which is perfect for quick oil studies. And in this case, I decided to just paint my art supplies, aka the paint tubes themselves. I'm going to start with the Lowry White to establish the basic shapes and composition. I come from a drawing background, so I still find myself defaulting to outlining the shapes rather than blocking in the form. It's something I'm working on, though both approaches have their place. Either way, I find it helpful, particularly for proportions, to pick an element in your composition as your anchor point, and then build all of your other elements off that anchor. So, for example, I made the large paint tube my anchor object. So once I have that shape painted, I use it to figure out the proper size and placement of the other tubes in my painting. Now, beyond testing materials, preliminary studies help me work through compositional and value problems earlier rather than later. When I'm planning a large piece, I'll often do several small compositional thumbnails, like a couple inches in size, just to work out the fundamental structure and values. I do these in my sketchbook, and it's honestly amazing how much clarity you can get from a few quick thumbnail sketches. Doing larger studies in oils like this is newer to my process, but I've seen other artists I respect doing them. And of course, the old masters did painting studies and drawing studies before going into their final pieces. So it's a time-tested approach for sure. If I may interject a little art history minute here on L.S. Lowry, the painter who inspired Lowry White. He was an English painter known for painting industrial landscapes and working class life in northern England. After a critique that his paintings were too dark, Lowry started painting his subjects on a white background and stuck with the practice ever after. Interestingly, I learned while researching Lowry that he held full-time employment throughout most of his art career, though apparently this caused some critics to dismiss him as a quote-unquote Sunday painter. But while critics may think that, his work remained popular with people, so what do they know? As someone who doesn't currently paint full-time, I found this tidbit rather interesting. Adding in the Ingleton Green Earth for the band around the paint tube, you can really see how transparent it is. You can also see the strokes of the brush more. I wonder if I'm loading the brush with too much paint and that's partly why it feels more streaky? I'm not sure, but I do find the color really beautiful. The gritty texture also adds kind of a tactile experience to paint, which is kind of cool. Let's add some of this gorgeous Backbarrow Blue. See how it just pops off the page, especially against the bright white canvas? I know I'm kind of biased towards blue, but this paint is a joy to use. So smooth, and you can't help but smile when you use it. Back to the benefits of studies. Freedom! When I'm working on a large piece or one that I have more conceptual vision for, there's often this internal pressure to make it good. but studies aren't precious. They're experimental by nature. This freedom allows me to take risks I might not otherwise take. There's a playfulness to studies that often leads to discoveries I can then apply to more finished pieces. Now that I have the swatches done with paint straight out of the tube, it's time to start actually mixing the paint. For the metal part of the tubes, I'm starting with Lowry White as the base, and then adding in a bit of Ingleton green, as well as I think a little bit of Backbarrow Blue. I want to see how they mix and how much of each paint I need for the color I'm going for. Like I said before, this is pure experimentation with a very limited and rather odd combination of colors in this case. And I'm not aiming for strict representation, purely plain right now. And that's actually something I want to talk a bit more about, the idea of balancing technical skill development with artistic expression. As I'm new to oil painting, though not a new artist, I've been in the skill development trenches with oils for a bit. So this balancing act has been on my mind lately. Now, I firmly believe you will never stop learning new techniques, and it's those techniques that will allow you to be expressive and tell the story you want to tell with your art. But I do admit at times I look at my work and it feels almost lifeless, if you know what I mean. Like I was so concerned with getting the proportions exactly right or matching colors precisely that I lost the emotional quality that makes art compelling. So here I'm blocking in the metal color of the tubes. I'm leaving the highlights and shadow areas blank and focusing more on the midtones. Generally with oils, I've learned to paint from dark to light, back to front, and I do like to paint that way. But sometimes I do the midtones first because my brain wants to, and that's what we're gonna do. I find doing studies like this helped me bridge the gap between technique and finding my voice as an artist. They help me paint more loosely and faster, which in turn helps me grow as a painter more quickly, so I can tell the stories I want to tell as an artist. It's amazing to look back at less than a year ago when I truly started painting with oils and how far I've come, though I still have a lot of areas I want to grow in. I've come to see technical abilities as expanding my vocabulary as an artist. The better my understanding of color theory, brushwork, and composition, the more effectively I can express my unique vision. The vision in my head doesn't always translate to the canvas quite yet, but I imagine that might always be the case as you grow in an artist. Your ideas expand too. Now, for me, mixing colors is a process of trial and error. I like mixing with a palette knife as it keeps my paintbrushes cleaner and in better shape, and I can easily compare my mixed colors with either my reference or see how it interacts with paint already on the canvas. After adding in a bit more blue to my mixture, I'm going in and adding shadows to build out the form of the paint tubes and add some depth. I think over time I've learned that technical practice doesn't have to be separate from creative work. I think choosing subjects to paint that you find interesting is a big part of this. What gets you excited to put pen to paper or brush to canvas? Is it a portrait, or a movie scene, or a pet, or a landscape, or a random object in your kitchen? I keep a running list in my notes app of things I think would be interesting to paint, and then I can refer to the list when I'm staring at a blank canvas unsure of what to paint next. As this study develops, I'm noticing more and more how rich these Wallace Seymour paints are, and I love the history behind the pigment. The Backbarrow Blue, for example, was a grade of ultramarine pigment produced at Backbarrow near Windermere in the United Kingdom until about the 1970s. And this Wallace Seymour paint is made from the same pigment. It's so neat learning about the background of art supplies and colors. Now I'm wondering, what would it look like if I patted a little of the Ingleton green earth on top of my shadow color? Does it help the colors feel deeper in the shadows or not? It doesn't quite do what I was hoping for, possibly because I'm painting wet on wet. I could see this being more effective if I were painting in layers and allowed the first layer to dry before going in with the green earth. Part of growing as an artist is learning to work with the unique properties of your materials rather than fighting against them. Sometimes what seems like a limitation becomes your distinctive approach. Limited color palettes often have this effect, like the Zorn palette, which is a famous color palette from Anders Zorn of Simply Vermilion, Ivory Black, Flake White, and Yellow Ochre. I haven't tried it yet myself, but I've seen other artists use it or a modern version of it, and it produces beautiful harmonious results. Now let's mix the color for the surface of the glass tabletop. There's something so mesmerizing about mixing colors with a palette knife though. It's just very meditative. I don't really want to fill the entire background, but let's just start and see how it goes. I'm being pretty loose with the background here, just building off the marks I've already made and seeing where I think the composition as a whole needs some value. I often go back and forth and around the composition when I paint. I didn't want the background to be just like a single solid blob, so I'm going to try to break it up a bit and not be super rigid with the background. Adding a background can really help ground your objects when you are painting a still life especially. Anything where you're having shadows come into play can really help give your object form, and I've really noticed that quite a bit when I was doing this study. I just move around the piece by feel, especially because this is just a study. I decided to add like these little patches of the background color, so your brain will visually connect it to the rest of the background, but it still adds some interest and helps move your eyes around the painting. It is funny how it's the little things that start to make a painting feel more finished, or just like feel pulled together. Like adding the caps of the paint tubes just really pulled the piece together and made it feel like I was in the home stretch for the painting. The painting still feels a little flat to me, so I think I'm going to go in and add an even deeper shade of the blue to the shadows of the tubes and maybe in other areas too. Given the colors I have to work with, I don't have a lot of options for shadow colors, but I think this is going to work okay. As this study is coming together and I add more contrast here, there, and everywhere, let's talk about another sometimes challenging part of painting: self-critique and reflection. Thoughtful reflection is a huge part of growing as an artist. When I finish a piece, I try to build in time to analyze what worked, what didn't, and what I might try differently next time. The tricky part, and I know many of you struggle with this too, is keeping self-critique constructive without falling into negative self-talk. I've definitely had periods where my inner critic was a little too harsh and it kind of paralyzed me creatively. I'd look at my work and compare myself to other people and only see flaws, and that is just not helpful. But on the flip side of that, without reflection and honest assessment of your work, you aren't going to grow. The key is to look at your quote-unquote weaknesses as an opportunity rather than a hopeless pit of despair. Not to be dramatic or anything. To bring in a bit more depth, I'm going to use the Ingleton Green Earth with a touch of Lowry White just to add some opacity as the ground shadows. And then I just start dabbing it around the background because the background felt boring and I thought it might add a little bit of pizzazz. So as you can see, I'm a bit chaotic when I paint at times, but hey, part of the fun, right? Now, to put this into practice, let's do a little critique on my study. First, let's look at what's working well. I like how the colors are interacting between the background and the paint tubes, particularly how the Backbarrow Blue creates depth while still feeling quite bright and active. And I like how loose and expressive the brushstrokes are. That was a goal of mine for this study from the start, and I think I managed to do that. The piece doesn't feel too stiff. As for areas to improve, I think the blue in the overlapping tubes just starts to blend together a bit too much. And I think the paint tubes themselves still feel kind of flat in areas, mainly where the paint swatch is. And yeah, it just doesn't feel as robust as I would like. The key in critiques is being specific about both strengths and areas for improvement, rather than making sweeping judgments like, this is terrible, or I'm not good enough. If you find yourself making those generalizations, try to pause and redirect to specific, actionable observation. One last thought on self-critique. It's important to separate the assessment of a specific piece from your worth as an artist or a person. A painting that doesn't work out isn't a reflection of your talent or potential. It's just one step in the journey, providing valuable information for the next piece. And remember, if you don't like a painting, just paint over it. It can be really freeing to sand down a painting if you're using oils and just start fresh over an old piece. Sometimes it even gives your new piece more depth as the paint interacts with the colors and textures below it. And now for an always satisfying part of the process, peeling the tape off. I don't know why this is always just so satisfying, but it is, and I enjoy it every time I do it. So that's it. We've completed the study. Some final thoughts on these Wallace Seymour paints. I'm genuinely impressed with their performance. The pigment load is excellent. giving these colors a richness and a depth that's noticeable even in this small study. If you're considering investing in some Wallace Seymour paint, I'd say they're definitely worth exploring, especially if you enjoy unique paint colors and handmade paints. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing or hitting the like button. As always, thank you for joining me as I tried out these paints. Until next time, happy creating! Bye!